Welcome to the Republican Professor. I'm your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. We have a reading from Psalm 73 today and Streams in the Desert, January 8th. And we're finishing Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, the majority opinion written by my boy, Neil Gorsuch, and I'm not happy with my boy in this particular decision, as you well know if you've been listening to these episodes. So we're going to get into whether the word sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act does rightly reach the issue of so-called transgenderism in discrimination claims in the workplace, private companies, not public, private. And as you remember, that was the controversial thing about the Civil Rights Act in 1964 was that it was bossing around private companies and telling private companies what they can do and what they can't do. And the issue was usually uh, that this realm of privacy in terms of what people felt they wanted to, who they wanted to associate with, including business decisions, that was historically limited to the household decision maker or the business owner. It was a private decision. Now, the government regulating the government actors, that's a different thing. So Barry Goldwater was a 1964 Republican presidential candidate. Last name is Jewish last name. Hardly a WASP, okay? He wasn't getting Christmas cards from the Klan, who, by the way, were Democrats. They were Democrats for a reason. It's because the Republicans crushed the Klan back to the Stone Age. I don't know if you know the history on this. There were just a very few Republicans that flirted with the Klan, but I'm talking about of the millions, most of them were Democrats. And what I mean by most is like 99%. So that's based on what I've looked at. And I've actually looked at primary sources on this. Um, I grew up in Denver, and Denver's in Colorado, historically a purple state. There's a lot of Democrats in the urban areas of Colorado. I don't know if Denver has ever been run by any Republican in like 100 years. You know, certainly in my lifetime, certainly in my lifetime, we had a major airport called Stapleton International Airport. That was the airport that I grew up with. It was named after a Klan member, Ku Klux Klan, Democrat. They're not going to name the airport after a Republican. It's not a Republican city. It's not run by Republicans. You know, you following me? Does it make any sense? Are you making any sense? Is it making any sense? You know, um, that's not how they roll, man. So yeah, there is. This is a little bit into the weeds, but the Klan is one organization. There's different organizations. And it's also a little bit misleading to say the Klan because it sounds like you're talking about an organism that never stopped existing and never, is it the same? These iterations, are they the same organization? Don't want to get too much into the metaphysics of groups and sociology, but in these preliminary remarks, I want to point out that there was a genuine dispute on two different levels. And those levels, for rhetorical political reasons, are smushed together, which usually leads to people not totally misunderstanding 1964 as it pertains to Democrats versus Republicans. The major candidate was Barry Goldwater, as I said, Jewish last name. His chief of staff was black, by the way. When he was in Arizona as one of the earliest senators in the state of Arizona, he desegregated the Arizona National Guard. He has a track record of being exactly the opposite of what the Democrat invented Klan. They invented the Democrats invented the Klan and they kept it going as much as they could. Even naming airports like Stapleton after it, well into the 1900s. Goldwater was from Arizona. He was from the West. Okay. He had a relationship with the Indian tribes. He he thought like a libertarian. Do you know what a libertarian is? I'm not saying a librarian, I'm saying a libertarian. He was like, get off my land. I mean, he was one of those guys that would come out with a shotgun and his slippers. He was a business owner too. His family ran Goldwater's, which was I think it was a furniture store. Everybody in Phoenix knew, everybody in Arizona knew what Goldwater's was. It was a major store. It would have been like Kmart. It would have been a major store that everybody knew about. Ralph's, if Mike Ralph was running for governor or senator in California, everybody would know that's the grocery store chain. It's like that. Okay. Stupid example, I know, but his philosophy was, we'll get into this in other episodes, okay? But his philosophy in opposing the 1964 Civil Rights Act was that not the entire thing was bad, not the entire thing. He got mad about parts that overlapped with some things that Democrats got mad about, the Democrats in the South, the Klan people, the people that put up with the Klan, or maybe they didn't privately, but they were all kind of mushed together in the South at that time, I think, in the minds of at least a lot of people. The prejudiced people, the people that are racially prejudiced. Goldwater was not racially prejudiced. He thought you didn't need the Civil Rights Act, and what it was going to do was it was going to cause more problems than it was going to solve. It was going to racialize the consciousness of Americans in a way that was going to hurt our culture. It was definitely going to hurt business because it was going to grow the government in ways which were harmful to business for the ability of people to make a living, because it's going to increase regulatory costs. You're going to be able to get in trouble for things you didn't mean to get in trouble for, which always happens. And that's what this case is about, Bostock versus Clayton County. Fast forward and you got like freaking 2020, you got Neil Gorsuch saying, basically towing the transgenderism line. And you can tell that's his angle. He wants to get in there, probably for personal reasons. It's certainly not in the text. His argument is not successful. You tell me if you think his argument is successful. I don't think his argument is successful at all. That the 1964 Act, it's 1964. What they wrote reaches transgenderism, which is something that someone came up with, I don't know, like very recently. Making up pronouns and stuff and pretending you're dressing up as the opposite sex. Dressing up as the opposite sex has been going on for a long time, but it wasn't invested with a relativism in the alethic sense, like alethic relativism. Truth is relative. Aletheia in Greek is truth. I did an episode on correspondence theory of truth in fall 2024. Check it out. I'll link it here. It's short. It's 15 minutes. It's very important to get what truth is. To pretend that we're relativists on truth, on the metaphysics of gender, are you kidding me? And then attach federal liability employment law to that. This is extremely problematic to say the least, it is harmful to the body politic. A lot of this is what Charlie Kirk was preaching about. I've seen several videos of him talking about the civil rights legislation. He doesn't go into detail about it. I'm not sure if he probably was a good performer and he knew that he was going to lose his quote unquote audience. It's not going to be as much of a spectacle or a performance that will go viral in a social media world if you go deep on this, which is why this is not going to go viral. I don't care. I don't want to be a virus. Okay. I want to help people grow. I want to help the future good leaders of our country, our culture grow so that we avoid these tragic mistakes later and we correct the ones that have already occurred. What Charlie Kirk says in those exchanges that I've seen when he talks about the civil rights legislation is that the key important ingredients that it was trying to fix was to achieve more equality between so-called blacks and so-called whites in private businesses so that private businesses couldn't contribute to a culture of disdain and contempt for so-called Black Americans. And Republicans supported the Civil Rights Act for those reasons. That's what they wanted to do. That's why 80% of Republicans voted for it, as opposed to 60% of Democrats. 2/3 of the opposition came from Democrats. There was some Republican opposition, like I said, the presidential candidate that year. The ironic thing is that Barry Goldwater was less racist than Lyndon Johnson, who is from Texas. All my exes live in Texas. And that guy was, I'm not saying he was a raving Klan member. I just think he was a typical Democrat and he saw an opportunity to grow grow control of business by a growing government. He couldn't resist that opportunity, and that means that he had to play kissy face with Black people. And that's the story of the Democratic Party. Democratic Party saw an opportunity to lasso in Black people, so-called Black people, by playing kissy face and pretending that none of their horrific stuff in the past ever happened in their party, which all of it happened in their party. There was some problems. There was corruption in the Republican Party, especially in the Grand. I'm not saying there's not problems. I never have said that in the Republican Party, but it was we're going through the age of entitlement. We're going through the age of entitlement by one of my favorite writers, Chris Caldwell, and we're going to talk about this. That's the next chapter is on race, and we're going to talk in depth about that, the 1964 Civil Rights Act as it pertains to race. But we're talking about the provision as it pertains to sex. And as you can see, what could possibly go wrong with the best of intentions? Well, there's a lot of things that are wrong with that legislation as it has been interpreted by court people, some judges. That's what today's episode is finishing. We're finishing Bostock. We're going to get into the dissents later, and the dissents, you're going to want to stick around for that, because that is going to be manna from heaven. Here's Psalm 73. Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. This is a psalm of Asaph, who was in ministry, as we like to say now. He was on staff. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They are free from burdens common to man. They are not plagued by human ills. Therefore, pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence. From their callous hearts comes iniquity. The evil conceits of their minds know no limits. They scoff and speak with malice. In their arrogance, they threaten oppression. Their mouths lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth. Therefore, their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. They say, how can God know? Does the Most High have knowledge? This is what the wicked are like, always carefree. They increase in wealth. Surely in vain have I kept my heart pure. In vain have I washed my hands in innocence. All day long I have been plagued. I have been punished every morning. We're on verse 15 now of Psalm 73. If I had said, I will speak thus, I would have betrayed your children. When I tried to understand all this, it was oppressive to me, till I entered the sanctuary of God. And then I understood their final destiny. Surely you placed them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly they are destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. As a dream, when one wakens, so when you arise, O Lord, you will despise them as fantasies. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you. We're on verse 23 of Psalm 73. Yet I'm always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is my strength, is the strength of my heart, my portion forever. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds. Psalm 73. A moment of reflection. Now we're going to Streams in the Desert, January 8th. We've been doing a reading from Streams in the Desert every episode for 8. Now this is the 8th time in a row. Started at January 1st. We're working our way through. Okay. Cowman Publications, Los Feliz Station, California, Los Angeles, California, 1925. We're on page 8. I will cause the shower to come down in his season. There shall be showers of blessing. Ezekiel 34:26. Showers of blessing. That's the name of a bookstore, Christian bookstore in Mililani Town, Hawaii in the 1990s, where I purchased Gordon R. Lewis and Bruce Demarest's massive 3-volume integrative theology. It was the bookstore I frequented the most when I lived in Hawaii for 4 years. Well, also Logos. I don't know how, but Mililani was where I was close to where I worked. So Showers of Blessing. Guess that's where they got their name of their bookstore.
You're going too slow, man. You know, you need to. I'm going to Twitter, man. I'm out of here.
Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Streams in the Desert, January 8th. What is thy season this morning? Is it a season of drought? Then that is the season for showers. Is it a season of great heaviness and black clouds? Then that is the season for showers. As thy day, so shall thy day, as thy day, so shall thy strength be. I will give thee showers of blessing. The word is in the plural. All kinds of blessing God will send. All God's blessings go together, like links in a golden chain. If he gives converting grace, he will also give comforting grace. He will send showers of blessings. Look up today, O parched plant, and open thy leaves and flowers for a heavenly watering. That's from Spurgeon. I'm going to have to look that up in the Hebrew to see if it really is in plural. Dust the old Hebrew off. Let but thy heart become a valley low, and God will rain on it until it will overflow. Thou, Lord, canst transform my thorn into a flower, and I want my thorn transformed into a flower. Job got the sunshine after the rain, but has the rain been all waste? Job wants to know, I want to know, if the shower had nothing to do with the shining. And thou canst tell me. Thy cross can tell me. Thou hast crowned my sorrow. Be this my crown, O Lord. I only triumph in thee when I have learned the radiance of the rain. That's from George Matheson. The fruitful life seeks showers as well as sunshine. And we got some poetry here. The landscape brown and sere beneath the sun, needs but the cloud to lift it into life. The dews may damp the leaves of tree and flower, but it requires the cloud distilled shower to bring rich verdure to the lifeless life. Ah, how like this the landscape of a life, dews of trial fall like incense rich and sweet, but bearing little in the crystal tray, like nymphs of night, dews lift at break of day, and transient impress leave like lips that meet. But clouds of trials, bearing burdens rare, leave in the soul a moisture settled deep. Life kindles by the magic law of God, and where before the thirsty camel trod, their riches beauty to life's landscape leap. Then read thou in each cloud that comes to thee the words of Paul in letters large and clear. So shall these clouds thy soul with blessing feed, and with a constant trust as thou dost read, all things together work for good, fret not, nor fear. Moment of silence for reflection. Streams in the Desert, January 8th. Now, let's get to work. What is our work today? We're looking at the judicial role in unveiling a legislative mistake from decades past. And this legislative role in granting the government power over private affairs, which is probably not a good idea in some of the ways they did it, is finally catching up to us. And there are some judges on the Supreme Court.
They're called justices.
The Chief Justice is called a justice in the Constitution. That's true. But the word is judge in Article 3 of the Constitution. You can look it up. We just read it on Constitution Day last week, September 17th. Look it up. There are some judges on the Supreme Court that are Republicans that fought against this by argument. And we haven't gotten to them, but we're getting there. They believe the Civil Rights Act itself doesn't have these problems. And I think Gorsuch disagrees. It's not clear if he agrees because he thinks there are problems that need to be fixed by Congress, not the court, or if he really does kind of hook, line, and sinker believe transgenderism. It's not clear from what he says. I think there's indications that shows that he's kind of drank the Kool-Aid on some of this stuff that's harmful, but it's not clear. In any case, we're going to continue, and I'm going to share my screen. Feel free to call me Sharon. I don't mind if you call me Sharon. We're doing a Bostock versus Clayton County. B. We're on 1750, page 17. Oh, sorry, 1749. Ultimately, the employers are forced to abandon the statutory text and precedent altogether, says Gorsuch in the majority opinion, Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, 2020, and appeal to assumptions in policy. Most pointedly, they contend that few in 1964 would have expected Title VII to apply to discrimination against homosexual and transgender persons. And whatever the text and our precedent indicate, they say, shouldn't this fact cause us to pause before recognizing liability? It might be tempting to reject this argument out of hand. This court has explained many times over many years, when the meaning of the statute's term is plain, our job is at an end. The people are entitled to rely on the law as written without fearing that courts might disregard its plain terms based on some extra textual consideration. Of course, members of this court have consulted legislative history when interpreting ambiguous statutory language, but that has no bearing here. Legislative history, for those who take it into account, is meant to clear up ambiguity, not create it. And as we have seen, no ambiguity exists about how Title VII's terms apply to the facts before us. To be sure, that statute's application in these cases reaches beyond the principal evil legislators may have intended or expected to address. But the fact that a statute has been applied in situations not expressly anticipated by Congress does not demonstrate ambiguity. Instead, it simply demonstrates the breadth of a legislative command. And it is ultimately the provisions of those legislative commands rather than the principal concerns of our legislators by which we are governed. Still, we're on page 1750 now. Still, while legislative history can never defeat unambiguous statutory text, historical sources can be useful for a different purpose. You guys recall we talked about this yesterday when we were going through Richard Epstein's chapter 3, Takings, Private Property and the Power of Eminent Domain, in his subsection in that chapter called Historical Sources. You recall that? That was just yesterday. Historical sources can be useful for different purpose. Because the law's ordinary meaning at the time of enactment usually governs, we must be sensitive to the possibility a statutory term that means one thing today or in one context might have meant something else at the time of its adoption, or might mean something different in another context. And we must be attuned to the possibility that a statutory phrase ordinarily bears a different meaning than the terms do when viewed individually or literally. To ferret out such shifts in linguistic usage or subtle distinctions between literal and ordinary meaning, this court has sometimes consulted the understandings of the law's drafters as some evidence. But given contextual clues and everyday speech at the time of the Act's adoption in 1919, hold on a sec. Okay, sorry. I skipped a sentence. For example, in the context of the National Motor Vehicle Theft Act, this court admitted that the term vehicle in 1931 could literally mean a conveyance working on land, water, or air. But given contextual clues in everyday speech at the time of the Act's adoption in 1919, this court concluded that vehicles in the statute included only things moving on land, not airplanes too. Similarly, in New Prime, we held that while the term contracts of employment today might seem to encompass only contracts with employees, at the time of the statute's adoption, the phrase was ordinarily understood to cover contracts with independent contractors as well. That just reminded me I got to fill out our church policy, workman's comp policy. I got to include the independent contractors on that. The employers, however, advocate nothing like that here. They do not seek to use historical sources to illustrate the meaning of any Title VII's language to illustrate that the meaning of any of Title VII's language has changed since 1964, or that the statute's terms, whether viewed individually or as a whole, ordinarily carried some message we have missed. To the contrary, as we have seen, the employers agree with our understanding of all the statutory language. Discriminate against any individual because of such individual's sex, nor do the competing dissents offer an alternative account about what these terms mean, either when viewed individually or in the aggregate, rather than suggesting that the statutory language bears some other meaning. The employers and dissents merely suggest that because few in 1964 expected today's result, we should not dare to admit that it follows ineluctably from the statutory text. When a new application emerges that is both unexpected and important, they would seemingly have us merely point out the question refer the subject back to Congress, and decline to enforce the plain terms of the law in the meantime. That is exactly the sort of reasoning this court has long rejected, says Gorsuch in Bostock versus Clayton County majority opinion. Admittedly, the employers take pains to couch their argument in terms of seeking to honor the statute's expected applications rather than vindicate its legislative intent, but the concepts are closely related. One could easily contend that legislators only intended expected applications, or that a statute's purpose is limited to achieving applications foreseen at the time of the enactment. However framed, the employer's logic impermissibly seeks to displace the plain meaning of the law in favor of something lying beyond it. If anything, the employer's new framing may only add new problems. The employers assert that no one in 1964 or for some time after would have anticipated today's result. But is that really true? Not long after the law's passage, there's that word again, gay. You talking about happy people? What's the problem with happy people there, Gorsuch? I don't think anybody was worried about happy people at work. Homosexual, I'm going to fix it for you, buddy. Homosexual and transgender employees began filing Title VII complaints. So at least some people foresaw this potential application. Well, what kind of happy person files a complaint? I don't understand what you're saying here. And less than a decade after Title VII's passage, during debates over the Equal Rights Amendment, others counseled that its language, which was strikingly similar to Title VII's, might also protect homosexuals from discrimination. I've seen that law review article there. We covered the ERA on the Republican Professor podcast in Carol Felsenthal's interview, 2023, July. Why isn't that enough to demonstrate that today's result isn't totally unexpected? How many people have to foresee the application for it to qualify as expected? Do we look only at the moment the statute was enacted, or do we allow some time for the implications of a new statute to be worked out? Should we consider the expectations of those who had no reason to give a particular application any thought, or only those with reason to think about the question? How do we account for those who change their minds over time after learning new facts or hearing a new argument? How specifically or generally should we frame the application at issue? None of these questions have obvious answers, and the employers don't propose any. Okay, we're making some good headway here. How are you guys doing on this? Doing all right? We are going to finish this sucker. One could also reasonably fear that objections about unexpected applications will not be deployed neutrally. Often lurking just behind such objections resides a cynicism that Congress could not possibly have meant to protect a disfavored group. Take this court's encounter with the American with Disabilities Act's directive that no public entity can discriminate against any qualified individual with a disability. Congress, of course, didn't list every public entity the statute would apply to, and no one batted an eye at its application to say post offices. Wait, you're telling me to say post offices? Post offices. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I thought he was commanding me to say post office. I was going to say, why are you commanding me to say post offices? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, post offices. Okay, I did it. And no one batted an eye at its application to say post offices. But when the statute was applied to prisons, curiously, some demanded a closer look. Pennsylvania argued that Congress did not envision the ADA would be applied to state prisoners. This court emphatically rejected that view, explaining that in the context of an ambiguous statutory text, whether a specific application was anticipated by Congress is irrelevant. As Yeski and today's cases exemplify, that must have been that prison case. Yeah, that was the prison case. Yeski. As Yeski and today's cases exemplify, applying protective laws to groups that were politically unpopular at the time of the law's passage, whether prisoners in the 1990s or homosexual and transgender employees in the 1960s, often may be seen as unexpected. But to refuse enforcement just because of that, because the parties before us happened to be unpopular at the time of the law's passage, would not only require us to abandon our role as interpreters of statutes, it would tilt the scales of justice in favor of the strong or popular and neglect the promise that all persons are entitled to the benefit of the law's terms. The employer's position also proves too much. If we applied Title VII's plain language only to applications, some yet determined group expected in 1964, we'd have more than a little law to overturn. Start with on Kale. How many people in 1964 could have expected that the law would turn out to protect male employees, let alone to protect them from harassment by other male employees? As we acknowledge at the time, male-on-male sexual harassment in the workplace was assuredly not the principal evil Congress was concerned with when it enacted Title VII. Yet the court did not hesitate to recognize that Title VII's plain terms forbade it. Under the employer's logic, it would seem this was a mistake. We're on page 1752, and I need to take a break to get a drink of water and a little bit of coffee. I hope you're enjoying this. I have very little commentary here because I actually agree with what he's saying as insofar as it goes. And it also fits quite nicely with what we covered yesterday with Richard Epstein in his chapter 3, judicial review and judicial restraint. I'm going to take a break here. I'd like to tell you about this coffee cup that I'm using, the Stanley. We got it before they redesigned their cups and then redesigned their redesign, kind of like Cracker Barrel did. It reminds me of my dad. My dad passed away today. Today, not today this year, but this is an anniversary of my dad's passing. This is 24 September 2025. And my dad passed away on 24 September 2008. And that led to my mom losing the house that I grew up in. Of course, if you know what was happening in 2008, 2009 with the housing market, you can understand the credit issues that were plaguing banks and borrowers at the time. But this Stanley is reminding me of my dad because my dad had a Stanley thermos that was green like this and exactly like this in every other way. And he used to take that to work. And I used to pretend being my dad, and I would pretend to pour coffee out of that thing. And I think I did actually have coffee out of it a few times. I went to my work with my dad a few times. He worked with his hands. He was incredibly strong. He could crush your hand with his handshake. And there were people that are twice his size that said that. He laid carpet, and the way he developed having such a firm handshake was that he had to grab the end of the carpet with his hands and pull the roll, and that's what he did. And he had incredibly strong hands. I mean, there were people that towered above my dad and were way bigger than he was that said they were scared of him. If you know, you know. And my dad had a temper, and he was quite scary. I have my dad's temper, and I can be quite scary. But yeah, we miss you, Dad. His name was Mark Mather. He grew up in Littleton, Colorado, and that's where I grew up. Went to Littleton High School. I went to Chatfield, and so we are thinking about Dad today on the 24th of September, 2025. I found out that he died by a voicemail that my sister sent me while I was driving to work. I was driving to Moorpark College from La Mirada, California. I was on the 5 freeway. I was about to hit the 118, if you know the 5. I had already passed downtown Los Angeles. I was in Burbank, I believe. I think I was stopping at a Starbucks, a Star Sucks in Burbank. Um, I used to meet my buddy Shannon Holzer there, roughly those years. Anyway, I was going up to teach my political philosophy class at Moorpark College. I've mentioned that class before. Matt Stone was in that class, who was the one who gave me the book Age of Entitlement, and we've talked about that. Michelle Fields was in that class. She was on Fox. What was the show she was on? Cashing In or something. I think it was Cashing In with who else was on that? Eric Bowling, I think, was on. I don't know names very well. Juan was on that too. I forget his last name. I'm sorry, I'm having a moment. But anyway, Michelle was in that class. She later went to Pepperdine, where I was also teaching at the time for over 10 years. And Matthias was on in that class. Mattia came on the podcast to talk about First Amendment religious liberty. Uh, and Michael Fields was in that class. Michael is Michelle's brother. Had a lot of great times with him, laughing. I'm surprised I still have my ass on. I laughed so hard. I laughed my ass off, and spent quite a bit of time looking for my ass on Moorpark College. Um, in fact, some people might go, why do you not have an ass? Well, 2008, I was laughing and I laughed my ass off there in Moorpark College, and it rolled down the hill, and I wasn't able to find it. I think it went into a parking lot. Probably went into the recycle bin. Well, anyway, I was on my way to teach that class, and I got that voicemail. I went ahead and I just kept driving. Kept driving. I was on the 118. I was going over the Santa Susana Pass into Ventura County. The sun, it was morning. I was in a daze. I was in a fog. I was numb. My wife had just quit her job the day before. It was her last day the day before. I was now the sole breadwinner. Went up to Moorpark. I told my chair, I told my dean, this is back when they were not totally crazy. They were a little crazy, but they weren't totally crazy. Told my colleagues, Janice Dario and the philosophy department, Jerry Chaplain, who, by the way, was Leo Strauss's TA at St. John's College. Interesting fun fact. He had a lot of papers of Leo Strauss. I was like, man, I wish he would have given them to me. Anyway, I told my chair, Ranford Hopkins, excellent chair, best chair I've ever had. History professor there. Why do I like Ranford Hopkins? Because he would call you on the phone and say, hey, how's this schedule look? Let me fix it for you. I love that he did that on the phone because as a adjunct professor, I was always running around and I didn't always have time to check emails and get through all the junk they send. Good Lord, it's even worse now. But he would just call you, man. And he would say, how you doing, man? How you doing? You hanging in there? And it would give you an opportunity to address an issue informally, not in writing. And he was so disarming that you could tell him anything that needed to be fixed, and you knew he was going to be on it. It might not get fixed right away, but he would be on it. I told my dean, who was my dean at the time? Ina Jane, maybe? I can't remember who the dean was. Oh, Lori Bennett. She later became president of Clovis College. Well, anyway, I think it might have been Lori, but that's back when I knew the vice president, Pam Edinger. I knew the president, Eva Conrad. I believe she was still the president. It was a community, man. I was part of a community. Those were the good old days, man. Those are the Bush days, Bush presidency. Now, people still hated Republicans, and I was the Republican faculty advisor. I was also the Hillel advisor, so I was a double whammy. People would say I'm a Zionist or whatever. I mean, I was just doing it because this girl Yam came up to me and she's like, "Hey, will you be our Jewish group faculty advisor?" I said, "Let me pray about it." Sure. You know, nobody else wanted to do that. It was back during the Bush days. Anyway, I'm going down memory lane there. Guess where I went after that? I went to Pepperdine. Did I have class that day? I can't recall. I was teaching logic, fall of 2008. I can't recall if I had class that day or it was the next day. It was either that day or the next day. Pepperdine had classes twice a week, either Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday, at least for me. Moorpark College had classes 2 days a week, either Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday. I can't recall which was which. But either way, I did go and talk to my chair, Mary Mullins, who hired me. She gave me a big hug. And Jenny Moore, who I don't know if she still is there or not. And I had a lot of very warm support. They said, "Don't worry about it. We got your classes covered." And then I went to Loyola Marymount. I went right from there to Loyola Marymount and talked to my chair, who I believe was Liz Murray. Is her last name Murray at the time? I can't remember. She was married to Mark for a while. Might have been Liz Morelli. I think it was Liz Murray at the time. Mark Morelli and Liz used to be married. Anyway, more information than you ever wanted to know. Liz gave me a big hug. I'm a little bit pissed at Liz because later she inflated one of my grades, like 10 years later, and I'm like still kind of pissed about that. Um, yeah, that those were days which were not as crazy. I was also the faculty advisor of the Republican College Republicans at LMU, and I was the faculty advisor of the college Republican, the Students for Liberty at Pepperdine. I had a lot going on. Um, It got worse and worse on campus. Yeah. So I look back on those days with some sadness for many reasons. It's not just my dad. It's for those days we'll never get back. Those days of relative freedom, of low gas prices. I mean, I never thought about gas. It never even occurred to me the cost of gas. I made enough money where it didn't, relative to gas. Nowadays, that's not the case. I don't think I could do that nowadays with gas prices. They went up so high and inflation went up so high. I mean, it just got worse and worse on campus. The toxicity got worse and worse. The economy got worse and worse. I don't know if you remember, but we had a Republican governor at the time, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I know he gets a lot of criticism, but he was a Republican. And as soon as the Democrats took over entirely, which happened in 2011, 2010, it just a few years later, the state got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and the college campuses got worse and worse and worse during Obama, worse and worse and worse and worse. Toxicity everywhere. And a lot of the toxicity has to do with the topic we're talking about today. But it extends out into many different things. A lot of it was a civil rights letter of guidance that the U.S. Department of Education issued during the Obama administration. Very, very toxic. And I don't think we're ever going to get those days back. I mean, the toxicity on the campuses came out on Charlie Kirk. That was just a visual. And I didn't look at it. I never watched that. I couldn't. I already know. And he did too. He did too. That's why he had a security team. The guy had a freaking SEAL team following him. I mean, a SEAL team and a half, actually. SEAL team is like four. Well, I'm talking about a squad. Okay. So he had not a platoon, but he had a squad basically following him all the time. Anyway, guys, we got a lot of work to do. And it's not even clear in what order we do it or how we do it. But Dad, we're thinking about you today. He was an incredibly funny man. He could do really funny impressions. You would probably be hurting from laughing so hard. Your sides would be hurting. And we miss you. You left a gaping hole. I'm sharing my screen. Feel free to call me Sharon. Where'd I leave off? I think right here. That's just the beginning of the law we would have to unravel. As one Equal Employment Opportunity commissioner observed, shortly after the law's passage, the words of the sex provision of Title VII are difficult to control. The difficulty may owe to something to the initial proponent of the sex discrimination rule in Title VII, Representative Howard Smith. On some accounts, the congressman may have wanted, or at least was indifferent to the possibility of, broad language with the wide-ranging effect. Not necessarily because he was interested in rooting out sex discrimination in all its forms, but because he may have hoped to scuttle the whole Civil Rights Act and thought that adding language covering sex discrimination would serve as a poison pill. Certainly nothing in the meager legislative history of this provision suggests it was meant to be read narrowly. I have minimal comments, like I said, because I agree with this. So, and so far as statutory construction goes, his techniques here are they're all right. They're okay. I think he's on the right path. I don't think he has the right conclusion, though. Whatever his reasons, thanks to the broad language Representative Smith introduced, many, maybe most, applications of Title VII sex provisions were unanticipated at the time of the law's adoption. In fact, many now obvious applications met with heated opposition early on, even among those tasked with enforcing the law. In the years immediately following Title VII's passage, the EEOC officially opined that listing men's positions and women's positions separately in job postings was simply helpful rather than discriminatory. Some courts held that Title VII did not prevent an employer from firing an employee for refusing his sexual advances. And courts held that a policy against hiring mothers, but not fathers of young children wasn't discrimination because of sex. I'm going to take a drink of coffee. We have about a page left. Yeah, about a page left. I print it out and make lots of careful notes. That's how I do it. And I read it. I read every word and I look up footnotes. Over time, the breadth of the statutory language proved too difficult to deny. By the end of the 1960s, the EEOC reversed its stance on sex-segregated job advertising. uh, this is something I don't think we ever figured out here, this issue of segregation. Yeah, I mean, as soon as you put sex in there along with race, if it's supposed to desegregate race, stay with me here on this. I just want to talk about segregation for a second. Segregation back in the 60s during this time was a litmus test issue for whether you were racist or not. And a lot of people disagreed with that. And there's different ways you can go as far as the disagreement, explaining the disagreement as a scholar, as a historian, as a political observer, doing political phenomenology. When you do political phenomenology, you have to describe accurately what took place. You can't just create a monster and then apply it to those old people who sang with hymnals in church pews. Let's think about this abstractly. In the issue of segregation, there's one school of thought, and I'm not, let's just let's pretend we can get rid of the racism. And I know for some of you, even getting rid of racism means you didn't get rid of racism because you're so attached to it. And I think the people that are that attached to it, they feel like they need it to win elections. I'm just psychologically diagnosing you right there. You want power, and this is a way you're going to get power is by calling everything racist. And, oh, look who's got the answer. You do. Oh, yeah, okay. Even though you say you can't get rid of it. So people with low attention span, which is most people, vote for it. Okay, that's my take on that psychological issue there. But let's just pretend, let's put the racism issue aside for a second, if that's possible. Maybe you won't grant that it's possible, but fine. The issue of segregation. Is the issue, can you possibly treat races, and what I mean by race is color. I mean what you look like, okay? Um, treat people who look differently equally with segregation, because segregation was invented to at least appear equal, even if in practice it wasn't. But it's a different question of whether it was equal or even possible to be equal. That's a totally different question, right? There are quite often two um, water fountains. By all accounts, I mean, when they're right next to each other, I mean, almost every gym I was ever been in growing up had two water fountains. One was a little bit higher than the other one. In all other respects, they might be equal. It might be that one water fountain has better water pressure and so squirts you in the face, but I'm saying that's not a function of it being over there and this one over here. You could in principle have totally equal water fountains. They're just separate. They're not unequal. One is over there and one is over here. That is how locker rooms were treated. The girls are over there and the boys are over here. It's not that they're unequal simply because they're segregated. We do that with parking spots. This one is designated for handicapped. This one is not. This one is over there. This one is over there. They're segregated. It doesn't mean that handicapped people are unequal. It doesn't mean anything about the parking spots inherently at all. It's just one's over there and one's over here. And what I'm trying to get you to see is that this requires a little bit of careful thought, which the reason people don't think carefully about it is not because they're incapable, but because they don't want to think carefully. They want to have any excuse imaginable not to think carefully. And the technique for having the excuse not to think carefully about it is typically to just call people racist. And that's the technique that was used. And it was used very effectively for a long time. Now, for some reason, having segregated locker rooms was fine. But if you said this water fountain is for girls and this water fountain is for boys, then they would be upset, unless the water fountain was in the locker room. Are you guys following this? What I'm trying to say is there's a confusion because of lack of critical thinking between the issue of segregation, which is separation, and equality. And that was never ironed out early on. So if the Civil Rights Act just included race, well, then you'd get rid of segregation in private establishments. But there's still self-segregation. I mean, a black family is going to sit together and so-called black family. The black family is not going to go over where the white family, the so-called white family is, and like just integrate into that table because we still segregate based on family. It doesn't mean this family is unequal to this family. They're still separated and segregated by table. This family is over on the counter. Well, it's because they wanted to get there first and they wanted the counter. I mean, so it's it's not a matter of where you are. That's not enough to show discrimination. There's other issues involved. One of the issues is that the issue of sex got put in the bill, and uh, people didn't think carefully about it. They didn't, they, as it pertained to race, physical separation, at least in some minds, meant hatred, even though that wasn't applied equally or logically or coherently. When it applied to sex, it didn't apply hatred for some reason, and no one ever explained why. Well, you fast forward decades, and then all of a sudden people start getting confused about sex and gender. And I think they're not really confused. I think that it's a manufactured confusion for political purposes. But the problem is when you manufacture that confusion, it affects children. Children are liable to be confused. See the episode we did on the Republican professor, Brenda Lebsack's episode 11, 2022. It's called Manufacturing the Cues in LGBTQ on call. And she's a board member of freaking Orange County Department of Education. She was a K through 12 teacher for over 30 years. She's seen this firsthand. I was shocked at what I saw. And it is politically motivated. So children are very vulnerable to this confusion. So it's a mess, man. What Gorsuch is saying is Congress can fix this. Is that really going to happen, though, with as confused as we are? A lot of the confusion pertains to looking to Congress to tell you whether you're a racist or not. Looking to Congress to tell you whether you're so-called transphobic or not. Why are we letting Congress tell us these things? Don't you know whether you are or not? Do you have the freedom to be? Uh, it gets very confusing very fast. And you could be a person of good intentions and just be genuinely confused, I think. Especially in the issue of sex, because the issue of sex involves some metaphysics about gender. And because of the way this situation comes up for discussion and litigation, any evidence that you've critically examined the possibilities involved with gender and sex could be used as evidence against you in a Title VII claim, because it's evidence that you considered sex in your employment decision, which would make liability apply, according to Gorsuch. That's my main complaint against this, is it's against critical thinking, period. Gorsuch is going to say it's a separation of powers issue. Congress can fix that. I'm looking at Congress and I'm like, I don't think these guys are sharp enough to fix it. I'm just going to say it. Maybe that's the correct separation of powers answer, but our culture is so far behind. And I think the court created this problem. It didn't have to. That we're in a real pickle here. Let's finish this, okay? I'm sharing my screen. Feel free to call me Sharon. Where are we at? Over time, the breadth of the statutory language proved too difficult to deny. By the end of the 1960s, the EEOC reversed its stance on sex-segregated job advertising. And by the late 1970s, courts began to recognize that sexual harassment can sometimes amount to sex discrimination. Wow. All of the sex discrimination class that you have to take because of HR comes out of that. Comes out of courts. It's not Congress mandating this, it's the courts creating all this stuff. And I think that there's a lot of problems with the way that that's interpreted. But let's keep going. While to the modern eye, each of these examples may seem plainly to constitute discrimination because of biological sex, all were hotly contested for years following Title VII's enactment. And as with the discrimination we consider today, many federal judges long accepted interpretations of Title VII that excluded these situations. Would the employers have us undo every one of these unexpected applications too? Well, hold on a second, Gorsuch. Don't you think Congress can undo that? Is it undoing it that's the problem, or is it who undoes it that's the problem? It's not clear from what he just said. The weighty implications of the employer's argument from expectations also reveal why they can't hide behind the no elephants in mouse holes canon. That canon recognizes that Congress does not alter the fundamental details of a regulatory scheme in vague terms or ancillary provisions, but it has no relevance here. Again, we're in Gorsuch, Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, 2020. We can't deny that today's holding that employers are prohibited from firing employees on the basis of homosexuality or transgender status is an elephant. But where's the mouse hole? Title VII's prohibition of sex discrimination in employment is a major piece of federal civil rights legislation. It is written in starkly broad terms. It has repeatedly produced unexpected applications, at least in view of those on the receiving end of them. Congress's key drafting choices to focus on discrimination against individuals and not merely between groups, and to hold employers liable whenever sex is a but-for cause for the plaintiff's injuries, virtually guaranteed that unexpected applications would emerge over time. This elephant has never hidden in a mouse hole. It has been standing before us all along. Let me just say something really quick here. It's not his weakest point in this. We're going to get to the dissents, and I want you to see whether the dissents correctly defeat this point he's making here. The issue before us is whether Congress can fix this. Gorsuch is saying yes. The way is open for Congress. The road is open. Congress can drive right in there. And I doubt that Congress will. I doubt it. And I'm worried. That's a general worry, though, about in general how much Congress takes itself to do for us. I don't like how much Congress takes itself to do for us. And that's a complaint not against Congress per se, but against the American people, because American people are entitled and they're great inflated. We are ultimately our worst enemy. That's what Dan Crenshaw would say. He has said it several times on his podcast. I don't know if he uses the word enemy. I'm not saying that he uses the word enemy. The concept there is there pretty closely, though. I think he would say the voters are ultimately responsible for this. And we need to fix the voters. That's why we're doing this, guys. Come on. With that, we're back to the Bostock versus Clayton County. The employers are left to abandon their concern for expected applications and fall back to the last line of defense, for all failing statutory interpretation arguments, naked policy appeals. If we were to apply the statute's plain language, they complain, any number of undesirable policy consequences would follow. Gone here is any pretense of statutory interpretation. That's a pretty serious charge. That's a very serious charge against his fellow Republicans. Stay tuned. Does that charge stick when we get to the dissents? All that's left is a suggestion that we should proceed without the law's guidance to do as we think best. But that's an invitation no court should ever take up. The place to make new legislation or address unwanted consequences of old legislation lies in Congress. When it comes to statutory interpretation, our role is limited to applying the law's demands as faithfully as we can in cases that come before us. As judges, we possess no special expertise or authority. See, he's going back to the Article 3 judicial power, the separation of powers argument he's making right here. That's what makes this a constitutional case. As judges, see, he's talking about Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution. As judges, this is not just a statutory and construction episode. This is a constitutional law episode because of what he's saying about Article 3 here. As judges, the judicial power, we possess no special expertise or authority to declare for ourselves what a self-governing people should consider just or wise. And the same judicial humility that requires us to refrain from adding to statutes requires us to refrain from diminishing them. What are these consequences anyway? The employers worry that our decision will sweep beyond Title VII to other federal or state laws that prohibit sex discrimination. And under Title VII itself, they say, sex-segregated bathrooms, locker rooms, and dress codes will prove unsustainable after our decision today. But none of these other laws are before us. We have not had the benefit of adversarial testing about the meaning of their terms, and we do not prejudge any such question today. Under Title VII, too, we do not purport to address bathrooms, locker rooms, or anything else of the kind. The only question before us is whether an employer who fires someone simply for being homosexual or transgender has discharged or otherwise discriminated against that individual because of such individual's sex. To review my earlier criticism, my criticism is there is a relevant employer issue, at least on the so-called transgender end of things. And that is it relevant in employment decisions if someone lies about their gender? And what does it mean to lie about your gender? Is that even possible? Seems like that would be relevant in an employment decision. And the but-for causation thing, that's also a problem. How much of a percentage of an employment decision counts as a but-for cause? 1%, 49%, 51%, 50.1%. His language is all over the place. He seems to imply, in earlier episodes we covered this, that an employment decision that was, 1% or 0.5% could be part of a but-for cause. And this is so messed up, man. There's so many issues here. It's hard to keep them all straight. What are these cons? So he's talking about these issues, the bathroom, locker room, dress codes. He's saying, yeah, well, as our role as judges is not to think about all that, is to think about this thing before us. And so far as he says this is, that I have no problem with what he's saying as far as being a judge goes. So I'm not making comments about that right here. All right. Um, the only question before us is whether an employer who fires someone simply, see that word simply is confusing to me because he's saying a but for cause could have other causes. It could just be one of many causes. And that's confusing when you say simply. That makes it sound like it's 100%. This but for causation thing is confusing. He hasn't unconfused it. Gorsuch, you need to get you should have unconfused that part, I think. You have the philosophical training to do it. You should have done it. You have a doctorate from Oxford in legal philosophy. Come on. Come on. Maybe you needed more metaphysics training. I guess your advisor didn't give you the metaphysics training you might have needed for that. Or maybe you weren't paying attention. I don't know. Um, as used in Title VII, the term discriminate against refers to distinctions or differences in treatment that injure protected individuals. Firing employees because of a statutorily protected trait surely counts. Whether other policies and practices might or might not qualify as unlawful discrimination or find justifications under other provisions of Title VII are questions for future cases, not these. Separately, the employers fear that complying with Title VII's requirement in cases like ours may require some employers to violate their religious convictions. We're on page 1754. We are also deeply concerned with preserving the promise of free exercise of religion enshrined in our Constitution. That guarantee lies at the heart of our pluralistic society. Worries about how Title VII may intersect with religious liberties are nothing new. They even predate the statute's language. As a result of its deliberations in adopting the law, Congress included an express statutory exception for religious organizations. This court has also recognized that the First Amendment can bar the application of employment discrimination laws to claims concerning the employment relation between a religious institution and its ministers. And Congress has gone a step further yet in the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, RFRA. This statute prohibits the federal government from substantially burdening a person's exercise of religion unless it demonstrates that doing so both furthers a compelling government interest and represents the least restrictive means of furthering that interest. Because RFRA operates as a kind of super statute, displacing the normal operation of other federal laws, it might supersede Title VII's commands in appropriate cases. All right, so he's trying to this is a delicate point. There is a mechanism here that you need to be aware of. What he just said. Because of the promise to be protected from this harmful charge of liability, because of the crazy stuff we're seeing and the confusions, and Gorsuch himself is to blame for some of that, for perpetuating the confusion, and Chief Justice as well. He signed on to it. There is a perverse incentive now to hide your employment decisions under the realm of free exercise of religion, so that you're cloaking these ordinary employment decisions with religious significance. That might happen. Maybe that would happen naturally, but what about those non-religious people that can think critically and have all the same issues that I have with this? What about them? What are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to invent a religion and then get ordained in that religion and then create a canon law that says this thinking critically is sacred and it violates our religious principles? It's like there's this perverse incentive to leave critical thinkers out in the dust who don't have a who have a conscience, but they can't attach it to any kind of religious protection. And so you're and who don't really believe it isn't a religious issue. So you're the perverse incentive is to get people to claim it's a religious issue when it's not. Really, the problem is it's not a religious versus not religious issue. It's an issue of can you think critically versus can you not think critically issue about gender. And can you identify unclarities in judicial decisions or can you not? That's the problem that I have with Gorsuch here. And I don't like this perverse incentive where people are incentivized to to hide everything, to smush everything in free exercise. It's a grab bag of things, and you're pushing everything into free exercise now because that's what protects you. And really, we're talking about employment decisions and whether you can tell the difference between a man and a woman and whether you feel like the guy's lying to you about it. Come on. Are you telling me that is that where we're at? Jessica Tapia is a good example of this in Southern California, Jurupa Valley Unified School District. She was a gym teacher. She said no boys in the girls' locker room. And she pushed back on the administration when they told her to lie to parents. And she said, are you asking me to lie to parents about whether the kid, when he comes to school, wants to be called a girl? You're asking me to lie to parents about that? I'm loco parentis. I'm in loco parentis, and you're asking me to lie to the principal? The principal, not of the school, but the principal in this is the parents. In loco parentis, I'm standing in place of the parents. The parents are the principal. You're asking me to lie to them. They said yes. Because of that, they had to pay $360,000 to her. They said yes. And they were Democrats and she was a Republican. Yes, this is a Democrat versus Republican thing, lying to parents about gender, about kids. It's a Democrat versus Republican thing. Is it a Christian versus non-Christian thing? Because what she did when she started talking to her lawyers was she started using this religious freedom exercise language so that she could have as much legal protection as possible. But what about people identically situated to her who are not religious? They said, I'm not religious. It's just that I can think and I know this is wrong. What about them? Do they not have the protection? That's what I'm saying is there's this perverse incentive. I mean, it might create a conflict within a non-religious person's conscience to now all of a sudden, so that they can get the protection from liability, to claim a religious thing and get them to invent some kind of religion. This is really a problem, I think. It's a problem of integrity, and a lot of it comes right out of how Gorsuch is writing this. Okay, let's continue. But how these doctrines protecting religious liberty interact with Title VII are questions for future cases too. Harris Funeral Homes did unsuccessfully pursue a RFRA-based defense in the proceedings below. In its certiorari petition. However, the company declined to seek review of that adverse decision, and no other religious liberty claim is now before us. So while employers in other cases may raise free exercise arguments that merit careful consideration, none of the employers before us today represent in this court that compliance with Title VII will infringe on their own religious liberties in any way. Some of those who supported adding language, we're almost done, to Title VII to ban sex discrimination may have hoped it would derail the entire Civil Rights Act. Yet, contrary to those intentions, the bill became law. Since then, Title VII's effects have unfolded with far-reaching consequences, some likely beyond what many in Congress or elsewhere expected. But none of this helps decide today's cases. Ours is a society of written laws. Judges are not free to overlook plain statutory commands on the strength of nothing more than suppositions about intentions or guessworks about expectations. In Title VII, Congress adopted broad language, making it illegal for an employer to rely on employees' sex when deciding to fire that employee. We do not hesitate to recognize today a necessary consequence of that legislative choice. An employer who fires an individual merely for being, and there's that word, happy, for being happy. You mean homosexual, I think. For being homosexual or transgender defies the law. The judgments of the Second and Sixth Circuits are affirmed. The judgment of the 11th Circuit is reversed, and the case is remanded for proceedings consistent with this opinion. It is so ordered. And now we have Justice Alito, joined by Justice Thomas dissenting, and then there's also a dissent by Kavanaugh. We'll get to that in future episodes. So this last part right here, fits with what we talked about yesterday in Richard Epstein's takings in chapter 3. Remember? And I'm going to read that section again in his book, Harvard University Press Takings. I'm on page 30. Justice Gorsuch is taking a judicial restraint approach. That's what he thinks anyway. The traditional argument in favor of judicial restraint argues Richard A. Epstein in Philosophical Preliminaries, Integrity of Constitutional Text, Chapter 3 of his book Takings, Private Property and the Power of Eminent Domain, Harvard University Press, 1985. The traditional argument in favor of judicial restraint, which is what Gorsuch thinks he's doing here, is that choices over economic matters, this is business regulation, economic matters, are best left to representatives of the people chosen by democratic procedures. See, that would be what Gorsuch thinks he's doing. The law says this, I'm chilling out and I'm just saying that's what it says. The argument for judicial activism rests upon the perception that flaws in the democratic process lead to the deprivation of individual rights, including those of property. See, that's what the dissent is going to say. You got to be more active here. You know, in terms of the Constitution, you're talking about property, you're talking about people's businesses, which involves property. You're talking about liability, which involves liberty. You're running your business involves liberty, right? Freedom of association. There you go with Lochner. You like Lochner. Well, we covered Lochner on the podcast. You can check it out. Just search Lochner. You'll see it. The emphasis upon democracy tends to lead to a rational basis test that offers so little scrutiny that most legislation passes constitutional muster as a matter of course. Now, These guys are not making a constitutional argument. I understand that. They're making a statutory construction argument. Got it? I'm just pointing this out. Emphasis upon imperfections of government lead to strict scrutiny and more extensive judicial action. I would have expected that there would have been a little bit more careful understanding of the issues involved here in terms of just gender. There is no way one side of this debate can vanquish the other, says Richard. In the abstract, the Constitution contains provisions designed to ensure that some decisions will be made by elected representatives, and also contains provisions designed to limit the powers of these same elected representatives. The traditional debate is often cast in the wrong terms by assuming that either activism or restraint gives a decent first approximation to the proper results. The Constitution clearly does not endorse any version of popular democracy, yet by the same token, it does not assume that legislatures have no task to perform. That's a quote from page 30 with my commentary from this book. And all I'm doing here is pointing out the integrity of the Republican Professor podcast in terms of the quality of the episodes and how they interact with each other. We're talking about the role of judges and the role of legislatures. What limits a legislature? Are there any limits on creating these crazy rules for businesses and the liberty of business owners? And to what extent are judges experts in these cultural matters too? I mean, Gorsuch is acting like an expert. He's using words like transgender status as if he's an expert on this or as if he's accepting expert opinion on it. I really think that what he did was swallow hook, line, and sinker the whole LGBTQ thing where the alphabet people are smushing these things together, as many as they can to make it look like they're as powerful as they can. And, in a way that, like I've said, heterosexuals don't do that. We don't put a different letter for male heterosexuals with female heterosexuals. We don't do that. It falsely implies there's a coalition that also is including the so-called transgender. That is a premise that he swallowed hook, line, and sinker, and he tried to smush them together in this. And I think he was naive in that. So that's my take on it. Because the so-called transgender thing implies questions that you should be able to ask and get a clear answer to. Questions like, can you lie about your gender? Yes or no? What does it mean to lie? Can you speak falsely about your gender? Yes or no? What does it mean to speak falsely? If an employer even thinks critically about that, he is now applying liability to himself, being accused of but for causation factors in an employment decision. And the causation issues are also worth poking into. What does it mean to be a but for cause of an employment decision? What does it mean to simply fire somebody because they're transgender? That's never even discussed. It seems like it would also include a firing decision or something that's accused of being adverse employment decision, not hiring somebody, not promoting somebody, moving their desk over there, whatever. It could be any number of things. Some employment decision that an employer makes, which is in part based on their assumption of whether the person is lying or speaking falsely about their gender. And it seems like speaking falsely and lying are relevant to employment decisions simpliciter, just by itself. But what Gorsuch is saying is no, that could be a but-for cause in civil liability at the federal level. So that Congress from 1964 is poking its nose in there and going, what are you doing? You're thinking about metaphysics of gender, you son of a bitch. Don't talk about my mom like that. Hey, thanks for joining me on the Republican Professor Podcast. I've been your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. Today is 24 September 2025. It's a Wednesday. We'll see you later.